Om Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityo Ma Amritam Gamaya Abhir Eti Rudrayate Dakshinamukam Te Namam Pahi Nityam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the ever-changing to the unchanging. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through, and guide us evermore with thy loving presence. Peace, peace, peace. Good morning. Nice to see everyone in person. Our topic today is the practice of Dharma. And I realized after giving the subject to Susie that it should probably be called the practice of Dharma and the good life. The practice of Dharma is a critically important aspect of the Hindu worldview and essential to the practice of Hinduism. The good life is an Americanism that refers to a type of life generally considered to be desirable and even covetable. We'll compare and contrast these two views of life and we'll start with the good life. Now, it seems to me that the good life has prosperity and leisure and pleasure. It's not necessarily a life of ease, the life of Riley, although it can be used in that way. A certain amount of work, a certain amount of achievement is assumed to contribute to this type of life. One can work hard and then retire, and if one stays healthy, can live the good life in retirement. Or one can live the good life while earning a living, especially if one's livelihood is congenial with one's disposition. A degree of comfort and joy from family and friends can be part of the good life, although not necessarily the most covetable part. The luxury to be a little frivolous seems to be part of the mindset for a good life. We occasionally read about the person or couple who very quietly lead a frugal, unostentatious life, quietly amassing a fortune, which, to the surprise of their friends and relatives, is donated to charity at their deaths. This would not qualify for the good life. Living the good life implies enjoying life here and now in the ways that people generally enjoy life. About 30 years ago, I remember attending a meeting of the Interfaith Clergy Council held at the Barnes Hospital complex. At that time, it was very difficult to legally cut off life support once someone had been put on it. And this was the topic because the ministers were in and out of the hospitals dealing with these issues among their congregations as they got sick. One of the Presbyterian ministers spoke about his own experience with his parishioners when they were very sick. And he said, I'd go in there and I'd be present when these decisions had to be made. There's a fork in the treatment road. And going down this fork, you stop treatment. Going down the other fork, you can extend life a little bit, but the patient won't be as comfortable. They'll have more discomfort, pain, more suffering. And each time the road forked, it got more expensive. Each time the road forked, the amount of time you gained decreased, and the amount of money that was spent increased. And I watched these decisions being made by and for the pillars of my religious community. And every time they came to that fork in the road, they took the fork that extended life and spent more money. After watching this for a while, I thought, if heaven is such a good place, why don't they want to go there? This is part of the understanding that goes along with this American conception of the good life. It seems to me that the good life does not refer to being good in this life so that we can go to heaven, but enjoying life here and now. One more thing about the good life. The important thing, it seems to me, is to somehow attain wealth and pleasure and the leisure to enjoy them. Whether one obtains them honestly is not so important. Being moral in the pursuit of the good life seems to be a matter of expediency for many, rather than a matter of principle. Now, this is a really important point. What are the consequences of putting wealth and pleasure at the forefront and putting honesty and goodness on the back burner? And I'm reading from the introduction to a book that we published called The Universe, God, and God Realization. The 21st century person, in general, is not opposed to religion, but rather indifferent to it. He's not an atheist or an agnostic, nor a skeptic of the 19th century type. This change in attitude towards religion may be partly due to the advancement of scientific thought. Physical science no longer holds to the old materialistic, mechanistic outlook on life and the world. Quantum physics, relativity, this changed things. Its conception of the universe no longer contradicts the existence of a supreme being beyond the range of the senses. The modern person does not usually deny God, but has a tendency to ignore God. He or she thinks that they can take care of the world without the help of God, make this life self-sufficient without taking into account what is beyond, or recognizing that higher dimension of being human, which is present in every cognition. Equipped with scientific knowledge and technology, he or she is set on making this earth a happy, prosperous, and secure place in which to live. The point is this: if we don't include in our scheme of life a higher existence beyond it, our minds naturally become focused on the world perceived by the senses and the inferences that our mind makes on those things. To enjoy earthly existence in all the variety and richness of that experience becomes the ideal of life. Science, philosophy, arts, ethics become increasingly subservient to the interests of material life, and consequently, they degenerate. They lose their uplifting force. Material achievement is lauded as the measure of our happiness, intellectual ability, and even our moral advancement. This understanding of human progress has prevailed in the West for over 300 years. And not just the West. This is the prevailing attitude in the world as the Western ideas have spread into the traditional cultures and every part of the world. When our inner nature deteriorates, material power and prosperity become insecure. and perilous. In fact, cold and hot wars on large and small scales ensue. This is what is happening before our eyes. And even the spread of education can be of little help when the materialistic outlook is predominant in the culture. The educational policy is determined by the culture's basic attitude towards life. If material advancement is the main objective, economic values will be given priority in every educational scheme. The general trend of its educational system will be to impress upon the minds of the young the necessity of wealth. They will learn the secret of making money without caring to learn the secret of right living. They will be much more eager to be prosperous and powerful. Sorry, it's on a different time schedule. They'll be much more interested to be prosperous and powerful than to be virtuous and spiritual. So this is the situation we're in. And I want to switch now from the good life to goodness. The first time that I went out to speak as a monk was to take part in an interreligious panel that was put together for the Honor Society at the Parkway High Schools. The question that was put to us by the honor students was this: why should we be good? It was clear from the discussion that followed that this was not an academic question, but one of deep personal significance. They were the cream of their high school crop. Why should we not do the wrong things that most teachers and most teenagers think about and sometimes do? They wanted answers from our respective traditions, but they also wanted reasonable, convincing answers that made sense to them. Our books say this or that, or even our God says this, was not enough. They wanted a rational explanation of the question, why should we be good in the pursuit of the good life? When Swami Vivekananda returned from the West for the first time in 1897, he said this to an audience in South India. The rational West is earnestly bent upon seeking out the rationality, the raison d'être, of all its philosophy and its ethics. And you all know well that ethics cannot be derived from the sanction of any personage, however great and divine he may be or may have been. Such an explanation of the authority of ethics appeals no more to the highest of the world's thinkers. Now, he was speaking in 1897. This is more generally true. It's not just the highest thinkers. They want something more as sanction for ethical and moral codes to be binding. They want some eternal principle of truth as sanction for all ethics. And where is the sanction to be found except in the only infinite reality that exists in you and in me and in all, in the self, the Atman? The infinite oneness of Atman is the eternal sanction of all morality. That you and I are not brothers or sisters. Every literature voicing our struggle towards freedom has preached that, but that you and I are one. This is the dictate of Indian philosophy. This is the dictate of non-dualism, of Advaita. And this oneness is the rationale of all ethics and all spirituality. Now, and this was Swamiji's main message to the West, non-dualism, if you read his works carefully. Now we're switching from the good life, the Americanism, to Dharma, to the Hindu worldview. What is the relationship between goodness and the good life in traditional Hinduism? Hinduism has 4 answers to the question, what do people want? They are the 4 aims of life. In Sanskrit, dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Artha and kama, taken together, correspond to the good life. Artha literally means thing, object, substance. It is usually translated as wealth, but has a larger connotation of achievement, worldly success, fame, wealth, beauty, and power. Kama means pleasure, but it is not limited to physical pleasure. It also includes intellectual and aesthetic pleasure. Now, dharma is one of those elusive Sanskrit words that is both deeply meaningful and difficult to translate into other languages. It corresponds roughly to goodness. So the relationship between dharma on the one hand and artha and kama, that is success and pleasure, on the other hand, is the relationship between goodness and what we call the good life within Hinduism. So let me say that again. The relationship between dharma on the one hand and artha and kama on the other is the relationship between goodness and the good life. Now, dharma is so comprehensive in its meaning that it deserves closer scrutiny. And for this, I go to an article in the 1985 Prabhupada Bharata, an editorial by Swami Nishpapananda, who's now one of our vice presidents of our monastic order. Dharma means that which sustains a thing or person. That is to say, dharma is the inherent property of an object by virtue of which it exists as a separate entity. Water slakes thirst, whereas a stone does not. A pencil cannot be used as a walking stick any more than a pen can be used as an umbrella. Every object has its own dharma, its own properties and uses which distinguish it from other objects. This is the physical meaning of dharma. This is its use in the Rig Veda. And this naturally implies a cosmic order, the interrelationship between all these objects with their specific dharmas. And dharma was first identified with the physical order that governs the universe. All the laws of science are only the manifestations of one universal truth, or dharma. The next stage of the evolution of the concept of dharma was to identify it with the social order. Every person has his or her own swadharma, which determines our place in society. What is swadharma? We don't just live once, and every volitional activity is recorded in the mental substance, the chitta, and that follows us life after life after life until we reach final liberation. We carry our own past into the present, and that's what determines our character. That's what determines our outlook on life. That's what determines our tendencies, And based on that, we should get an education and follow a life that's consonant with those things that we need to work out in this life, which are different for each of us. That's Swadharma, that's the social order. And it's in this sense that Dharma is used in the old law books, the Manu Smriti. And the social order naturally implies the principle of justice. And justice cannot be enforced without assuming a universal moral order. And it is in the great epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, that we found Dharma identified mostly with the moral order. It is in terms of the moral order that the interpersonal realm that Dharma has its primary meaning. This is vividly described in the great epics, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata. The primary message, there's a saying, if it's not in the Mahabharata, it's not in India. The primary message of the Mahabharata is where there is dharma, there's victory. The story is this. On the eve of the great civil war between the Kauravas and the Pandavas, the leader of the Kauravas, Duryodhana, approached his mother, Gandhari, and asked for her benediction. The blessings of one's mother are considered to be akin to the blessings of God. And this is especially true of a virtuous mother like Gandhari. Gandhari knew that her son was following adharma, unrighteousness. And when Duryodhana asked for her blessings for victory, Gandhari said, where there is dharma, there's victory. She knew that her son's unrighteousness would be his undoing. In spite of her love for her son, she could not give her blessings for his victory because she could see that his adharma would not let him win. You see, this is on a longer scale of time. You can somehow evade human law, but you can't evade divine law. Might not be in this life. It catches up with you. Dharma is the moral order of this universe through which justice works. It is like a natural law operating in the domain of morality. Whether we're aware, it's an analogy, whether we are aware of the law of gravitation or not, it has the same effect on us. It doesn't need our knowledge or our assent in order to function. If a person jumps from a high place onto a hard object, there are consequences, with or without the belief in Newton's laws. Similarly, violation of the moral law has consequences whether we believe in the moral law or not. Before our anger reaches its target, we ourselves are victimized by the turmoil caused by anger. Before our benign thoughts can have any effect, before our prayers for another's welfare can have any effect, we ourselves are benefited. According to traditional Hinduism, the one universal duty of all human beings is the practice of Dharma. All people, past, present, future, regardless of race, creed, education, social status, or any other characteristic, should follow Dharma. What does it mean? The most powerful, meaningful English rendering for me is this: the one universal duty of all human beings is the practice of virtue. And by virtue is meant the cultivation of fellow feeling towards our fellow beings and overcoming negative feelings. Sounds easy. It's not. It's on a sliding scale, you know. No matter where you are, there's room for improvement. Kindness, sincerity, charity, justice, truthfulness, admiration, humility, which represent our fellow feeling towards our fellow beings, are counted as virtues and constitute dharma. Those virtues, that dharma, is the way that a deep, abiding fellow feeling for others percolates through our mental and emotional systems. This deep, abiding feeling for others has its origin at the most fundamental level in the spiritual order, which is the fourth meaning of dharma. It is at this level that Atman is realized as Brahman. It is at this level that our center of loving consciousness that we come to eventually to understand it's there is experienced as one with all-pervading self-existent consciousness, which is the nature of bliss. This is Advaita, as I spoke before. And it is at this level that Dharma came to refer to God realization from about the 10th century onward, and the Hindu religion referred to as Sanatana Dharma, the path that leads consciously or unconsciously by ways crooked or straight to the ultimate human fulfillment in the realization, the direct experience of that divinity. It is at the level of Atman that differences cease. We're different physically. We're more different from one another, much more different from one another mentally, but absolutely identical as Atman, that center of loving consciousness, that witness consciousness, that's the string that connects all the events in our life and abides always behind the relative awareness, and is the source of all joy, is exactly the same in every human being. It is this oneness that Swami Vivekananda referred to in the earlier quote as the rationale of all ethics and spirituality. So there are four orders of dharma: physical, social, moral, and spiritual. Primary meaning is on the moral level. And there are four aims of life: artha, success and wealth; kama, legitimate pleasure, are associated with the physical and social aspects of dharma. Moksha, liberation, is associated with the spiritual aspect of dharma. And it is the moral order, dharma, goodness, the practice of virtue, that connects the good life aimed at success and pleasure with the path of liberation. So this is a whole scheme of life. It doesn't end with the good life. The good life, getting what life has to offer, realizing success, achievement, fame, pleasure, is not the end. That's the start of another journey. What does following Dharma, what does practicing virtue do for us as we pursue success and pleasure? The practice of virtue purifies and calms the mind, calms the senses, brings clarity to the intellect. It is through the clear, calm mind that the light of Atman is transmitted without distortion. And it is through the clear, calm mind that the spontaneous joy of the Atman finds expression and spontaneous glimpses of the realm of the spirit start to come to us. Now, happiness in this view comes from inside, not from outside. All happiness is here in the Atman. Now, when I was a teenager, my sister had a close friend whose mother was a Holocaust survivor. And we, of course, didn't know that. It just seemed like her parents seemed like, and actually both of her parents were. But after her kids were grown, Mrs. Pappenheimer started talking about her experiences during the Holocaust. And one of the things she said which struck me, she was in an orphanage in France, posing as a non-Jewish orphan, separated from her family, not knowing what had befallen them. They were victims of the Holocaust. Just this kid, maybe 5 years old. And she's going down the main stairway of the orphanage, and all of a sudden this happiness wells up within her from nowhere. And she thought, this happiness comes from inside. It's not dependent on external circumstances. What an insight. What a wonderful insight for a child. And she carried that with her. She didn't know about Atman, but she carried that with her the rest of her life. So I'm speaking about the benefits, the practical benefits of the practice of Dharma. The clarity that comes to the intellect through the practice of virtue is essential to right understanding. It's through the clear, calm mind that we can make decisions that are in our own best interest. And through those decisions, this is how we guide ourselves through life. Through those decisions, get the best that life has to offer. A seeker of wealth and pleasure in any form who does not deviate from the path of virtue, from the path of Dharma, from the practice of Dharma, gets the greatest benefit out of every situation that comes to him or her. I'll repeat that. A seeker of wealth and pleasure in any form who does not deviate from the path of virtue gets the greatest benefit out of every situation that comes to him or her. Now, this seems diametrically opposed to the conventional American wisdom about the good life, in which getting wealth and pleasure is primary, and being honest and moral in their pursuit is a matter of expediency, certainly not the essential thing. I was in Raleigh, North Carolina at our center earlier this year, and it's not an affiliated center, but it's a wonderful group of people. And they've done remarkable work there without having the benefit of a dedicated monk or nun to live there and guide them. They have a wonderful children's program. They have a Sunday school. They teach their children the Ramakrishna Vivekananda tradition. They teach them general Hinduism. They teach them morals and values. The families come together with their kids and clean and polish the ashram before important functions. They become each other's friends, you know, and one family will leave their kids with another family when they have to go somewhere, some kind of, you know, they become their own support group. And one of the mothers was talking with me after a talk, and she said, my son has been through this program. We've worked really hard at it. We've made a lot of sacrifices to make this happen. And he's a teenager now, and he recently told me, Mom, as far as I'm concerned, the goal in my life is to get rich. It's so disappointing. We worked so hard. And my husband and I aren't able to cut into his conviction with any argument that we have or with the training that we've provided him. Now, this is a huge problem that we face as a culture. The tide of this materialistic outlook is so strong that it's very difficult to countervail it. Now, I've been speaking of Dharma from the perspective of traditional Hinduism. In that worldview, Dharma is primary, and wealth and pleasure are secondary or derivative. This is an argument based on authority of Scripture and on tradition. Now, what evidence is there here and now in this American life that success and wealth and pleasure, the good life, take a back seat to honesty, to virtue, and to goodness? What if we could watch American lives as they unfold through time? What if we could study Americans from the time they were teenagers through old age and death to see what really makes them happy and healthy? That has been done. In the Harvard study of adult development, which since 1938 has tracked the lives of 724 men as they unfolded. I'll quote now from a talk given by the current director, they've had 4, Robert Waldinger, from a talk he gave some years ago titled, What Makes a Good Life? Lessons from the Longest Study on Happiness. Since 1938, we've tracked the lives of 2 groups of men. The first group started the study when they were sophomores at Harvard College. They all finished college during World War II, and then most of them went off to serve in the war. The second group that we followed was a group of boys from Boston's poorest neighborhoods, boys who were chosen for the study specifically because they were from some of the most troubled and most disadvantaged families in the Boston of the 1930s. Most of them lived in tenements, many without hot and cold running water. When they entered the study, all these teenagers were interviewed. They were given medical exams. We went to their homes. We interviewed their parents. And then these teenagers grew up into adults who entered all walks of life. Factory workers, lawyers, bricklayers, doctors, one president of the United States. Some became alcoholics. A few developed schizophrenia. Some climbed the social ladder, all the way from the bottom to the very top. And some took a journey in the opposite direction. Many of the men who started in the inner city ask us, "Why do you keep wanting to study me? My life just isn't that interesting." None of the Harvard men ever asked that question. Now, to get their clearest picture of their lives, we don't just send them questionnaires. We interview them in their living rooms. We get their medical records from their doctors. We draw their blood. We scan their brains. We talk with their children. We videotape them talking with their spouses about their deepest concerns. And, well, you got to remember, 1938, Harvard was a school for men. And about a decade ago, we finally asked the wives if they would like to join us as members of this study. And most of them said, it's about time. So what have we learned? What are the lessons that come from the tens of thousands of pages of data that we've collected? Well, he started his talk saying that a recent survey of millennials had indicated that about 80% of them thought that wealth was the most important thing in life, and another 50% fame. These are the things that they wanted to get. So what have we learned? Well, the lessons aren't about wealth or fame or working harder and harder. The clearest message that we get from this study is this: good relationships keep us happier and healthier, period. And he didn't say this is my editorial. What are good relationships, good, happy, interpersonal relationships founded on? They're founded on Dharma. They're founded on the practice of virtue. They're founded on self-sacrifice. And good human relationships, there's love that's transmitted through those relationships. You see, Dharma is love in action. It's that love of the Atman that comes through the psychophysical system and interacts with other people. We've learned three big lessons about relationships. First, social connections are really good for us, and loneliness, toxic. Loneliness has an effect on our health that's just as bad as smoking and alcohol. It turns out that people who are more socially connected to family, to friends, to community are happier, they're physically healthier, and they live longer than people who are less well connected. And the experience of loneliness is toxic. People who are more isolated than they want to be find that they are less happy, their health declines earlier in midlife, and their brain functioning declines sooner, and they live shorter lives than people who are not lonely. And the sad fact is that at any given time, more than 1 in 5 Americans will report being lonely. The second big lesson that we learned, it's not just the number of friends you have, and it's not whether or not you're in a committed relationship, but it's the quality of your close relationships with other people that matters. It turns out that living in the midst of conflict is really bad for our health, and living in the midst of good, warm relationships is very protective of health and happiness. Once we followed our men all the way into their 80s, we wanted to look back at them at midlife to see if we could predict who was going to grow into a happy, healthy octogenarian and who wasn't. When we gathered together everything we knew about them at age 50, it wasn't their middle-age cholesterol levels that predicted how they were going to grow old. It was how satisfied they were in their close human relationships. The people who were the most satisfied in those relationships at 50 were the healthiest at age 80. And good, close relationships seem to buffer us from some of the slings and arrows of getting old. Our most happily partnered men and women reported in their 80s that on the days when they had more physical pain, their mood stayed just as happy. But the people who were in unhappy relationships, on the days when they reported more physical pain, it was magnified by more emotional pain. And the third big lesson we learned about relationships and our health is that good relationships don't just protect our bodies. They protect our brains. It turns out that being in a securely attached relationship to another person when you're in your 80s is protective. That people who are in relationships where they really feel they can count on the other person when times get tough, those people's memories stay sharper longer. And people in relationships where they feel they really can't count on the other person, those are the people who experience earlier memory decline. And the good relationships, he continues, don't have to be smooth all the time. Some of our octogenarian couples could bicker with each other day in and day out. But as long as they felt they could really count on the other when things got tough, those arguments didn't take a toll on their mental health. Many of our men, when they were starting out as young adults, really believed and reported this, that fame and wealth and high achievement were what they needed to go after to have a good life. But over and over, these 75, at that time it was 75 years, now it's 84, over and over, our study has shown that the people who fared best were the people who leaned into relationships with family, with friends, with community. This is Dharma. This is what holds us as human beings. And it's the foundation of both our secular and spiritual life. So, as I said, Dharma calms the mind. And in a calm mind, a pacified mind, we have our clearest understanding, that intuitive faculty, that aha faculty, the buddhi. It's not intellect, it's not cogitation, it's determination. That intuition that guides us functions most effectively, guiding us through this life to get the best of life, the best of artha, success, and the best of pleasure. By following Dharma, by practicing Dharma, from one's own experience of the blessings of life, wealth, power, position, beauty, knowledge, happiness, honor, one develops the insight by which one becomes convinced of the inherent inadequacy of the greatest success. Swami Vivekananda says, we're infinite dreamers, dreaming finite dreams, and those dreams can never satisfy us. The only thing that's going to satisfy us is that infinite nature. The human mind seeks life without death, prosperity without adversity, youth without old age, construction without decay. And we can't get those things by manipulating Maya. It takes a long time to understand that through experience. Through the practice of Dharma, one realizes that these polarities go together, and that seeking one without the other is a wild goose chase for the unmixed blessings of life. This awakens us to the spiritual level, the transcendent level of our own nature. It is then that one tries to approach the divine ground with unfaltering steps. It is then that one says, "In this world in search of wealth, I have found thee the greatest treasure. In this world in search of someone to love, I have found thee the most adorable one." Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, "Those persons of virtuous deeds whose vices have been eliminated become free from the delusion of dualities and worship God with firm resolve." This marks the transition between the good life, the pursuit of artha and kama, the pursuit of success and pleasure, the transition to the path of supreme beatitude, the pursuit of liberation, the pursuit of moksha. Those awakened to the call of the eternal, and the eternal alone are few. But you never know when it's going to happen. That's the thing. You never know. It's the reality, and sooner or later everyone wakes up to it. So to sum up, this is the perspective of Hinduism. The pursuit of wealth and pleasure and the good life must be based on Dharma for our individual and for our collective well-being. And Dharma is based on the highest truth, that reality is not material or energetic, but spiritual, consciousness and bliss absolute. And that reality is non-dual. It's like you can look at liberation through the path of knowledge as the deconstruction of the universe. It just vanishes. Maya vanishes when you have that non-dual experience. Dharma is based on the highest truth. Dharma is the means, is the manner in which this highest truth of non-duality, which is open to discovery by each and everyone, manifests on the interpersonal, the moral level, the intrapersonal, the psychological level, and the social level. So, and the fruits of Dharma can be verified very easily. If we have a spiritual practice, if we have a regular spiritual practice, be that meditation or ritual or reading, there are many forms of spiritual practice. Social service is also a spiritual practice. We can discover by observing ourselves that adharma agitates the mind and causes these problems, mental and physical, if they go on. See? So it's something that we can verify for ourselves if we watch ourselves carefully. And that's the whole purpose of spiritual life. It's to turn our inner lives into a controlled experiment where you can notice every day, you do your spiritual practice, what is it that's stopping me from being calm and getting that connection with the divine ground? You know you get the connection with the divine ground Because in your spiritual practice, you forget yourself. You forget who you are, you forget where you are, you forget, and when you do that, you forget all your concerns, you see. And you touch that infinite, whether it's through personal relationship with your chosen ideal, or it's through the direct contact with Atman. And you forget yourself, and you forget your ego and its concerns. But you do it consciously. You don't have to go into deep sleep to forget the ego. You see, that's the advantage of meditation. You can do it consciously, and you can watch that divine light come into your mind. You can watch it percolate through the different systems in the body-mind complex. So, we have these knee-jerk reactions. In certain situations, we know we have reactions emotionally. Okay? But eventually, you realize, well, no. You think backward. No, I got upset then, and that was the situation, and that's why I can't concentrate my mind now. You think, oh, okay. And then at some point, it becomes more important to keep your mind calm than to react. So you reverse engineer it. You get in that situation, and you say, no, not this time. You see, it changes us. That steady practice over time changes us. There's a purification process that goes on, and it changes our behavior, changes the way we live. It changes the mind so that it's calmer, so that we can guide ourselves better through this life, and eventually come to that point where we say, no, the best that this life has to offer is not good enough. And we don't need millions or billions of dollars to come to that conclusion. We can do it as poor people, we can do it as rich people, we can do it as bricklayers, we can do it as the President of the United States, although I think it's harder. So, anyway, I'll close with a prayer. Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. This ever-changing, interdependent universe of things and beings is infinite. That self-existent, unchanging spiritual reality is infinite. This ever-changing universe, having come from that unchanging spiritual reality, that spiritual reality remains. Undivided, unchanged, complete, perfect, infinite.